The morning began like every other in Eliandro Eli Santos's life, quiet, slow, and filled with the soft hum of dreams that never seemed to leave him. The sun slipped gently through the thin curtains of his small rented room, touching the faded posters of classic singers he admired. Somewhere in the corner rested his old guitar, its wood worn and tired, carrying the marks of years of hope pressed into its strings. It wasn't just an instrument. It was the only companion that had stayed with him through every heartbreak, every disappointment, and every promise he made to himself. Eli moved through the room silently, as if afraid to disturb the memories around him. A framed photograph of his mother sat on the bedside table, her smile gentle and proud. He carried her memory like a soft weight on his chest, heavy enough to push him, but warm enough to comfort him. She used to call him her old soul, a young man with a voice shaped by life far beyond his age. That voice had carried him across small stages, community gatherings, and long nights of singing to empty rooms. The world rarely noticed him, but he kept singing anyway. As he stepped outside, the city greeted him with noise and movement, a sharp contrast to his quiet spirit. The streets were filled with strangers chasing their own dreams, unaware of the young Filipino man walking with a guitar case that held his entire heart. This day felt different, though he couldn't explain why. A gentle nervousness followed him with every step, as if something awaited him beyond the familiar struggle. Hours later, he found himself standing before the towering venue of America's Got Talent. The building rose like a monument of impossible dreams, glowing under the morning light. People from every corner of the world lined up, some confident, some trembling, some simply desperate for a chance. Eli stood among them, his breath shallow, his palms damp, yet his eyes quietly determined. He tightened his grip on his guitar case. This was the moment he had imagined countless times. A moment that felt both fragile and powerful, like a dream balancing on a thin thread. He didn't know what the day would bring. But he hoped, for once, life would finally listen to his voice. The backstage area buzzed with restless energy, camera crews rushing from corner to corner, hopeful contestants pacing in nervous loops, and the distant murmur of thousands of waiting spectators. Yet, for Eli, everything felt strangely quiet. The world around him moved fast, but inside him, time slowed to a careful crawl. He stood in a narrow waiting corridor, clutching his guitar case as if it was the only thing keeping him steady. A thin layer of sweat formed on his palms, not from fear alone but from the weight of every year he had waited for this single chance. The stage lights glimmered faintly through the curtains, throwing long shadows across the floor. Those glowing beams felt like a distant promise, warm, intimidating, and dangerously close. Eli's name echoed softly from somewhere ahead, and the sound drifted through the hallway like a gentle push. He inhaled sharply, feeling his heartbeat throb like a drum inside his chest. He took one small step forward, then another. Each footfall felt heavier than the last, as if every doubt he had ever carried tried to hold him back. Memories flickered in his mind, nights when he sang to no one, days when hunger replaced hope, moments when giving up felt easier than moving forward. Yet here he was, walking toward the brightest stage in the world. He wasn't just carrying a guitar. He was carrying the quiet strength of every unseen dreamer who had ever fought to be heard. As he reached the edge of the curtain, he paused. The sound of the audience washed over him, a wave of chatter, laughter, and restless excitement. It made him feel small, like a single drop in an ocean. The judges' table stood tall beneath the blazing lights, their silhouettes sharp against the glow. Their faces were unreadable, distant, and intimidating. Eli's fingers trembled slightly as he adjusted the microphone height. The silence that followed felt heavy, almost suffocating. The arena waited for him to begin. Cameras zoomed in. Lights intensified. Thousands of eyes focused on the quiet Filipino man standing alone at the center. In that fragile moment, Eli wondered if this stage would break him, or reveal who he truly was. Either way, there was no turning back. He took a breath deeper than any before. And prepared to let the world hear his soul. The arena felt impossibly large, like a vast ocean of expectant faces stretching far into the shadows. Eli stood at the center, illuminated by a cold white spotlight that made every breath feel heavier. For a moment, the world hushed. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was sharp, filled with judgment, curiosity, and doubt. The judges sat still, their expressions neutral, almost bored, as if they had seen 1,000 hopefuls already. The crowd waited, restless and uncertain. Eli closed his eyes for a brief second, grounding himself in the memory of simpler days. He remembered singing barefoot in his childhood home, when his voice carried through open windows and danced with the evening wind. He remembered his mother humming softly as she cooked, encouraging him without words. Those memories wrapped around him like a quiet shield, steadying his shaking hands. And then, he let the first note escape. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was gentle, so gentle that it felt like a whisper floating through a storm. But something in that softness carried a weight that no one expected. A warm, soulful tone filled the air, textured with raw emotion and years of quiet longing. The note drifted through the arena like a thread of pure truth. The shift was immediate. The audience, once distracted, grew still. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Faces turned toward the stage with widened eyes. Even the judges leaned forward, their expressions slowly melting from indifference to stunned attention. That single note didn't just introduce a song, it revealed a story, a life. As Eli continued, his voice blossomed with layers of pain, hope, and resilience. The richness in his tone reminded people of something old, something familiar, something they had forgotten they needed. It wasn't an imitation of Elvis, it was a soul shaped by struggle, echoing through every chord. Each rise and fall of his voice carried a piece of his past, empty nights, long walks, whispered prayers, silent promises. The music filled every corner of the arena, wrapping around strangers who suddenly felt connected to a young Filipino man they had never met. In that moment, no one saw his nerves, his shyness, or his worn-out clothes. They saw only the truth of his voice, honest, fragile, and impossibly powerful. For the first time in his life, the world was finally listening. The song carried Eli through a river of emotions, each verse revealing a little more of the story he had kept inside for so long. Every line trembled with truth. Every breath carried a quiet ache. The arena had transformed from a noisy sea of strangers into a vast, listening heart. People who had never met him now felt as though they had known him their whole lives. As Eli reached the final section of the song, something shifted inside him. It was as if a door opened deep within his chest, releasing every buried memory in a single surge. His voice rose slowly, gathering strength like a rising tide. He could feel the presence of his mother, her warmth, her hope, her belief in him, standing beside him like an unseen guide. The spotlight softened, turning golden, casting a warm glow across his face. The melody climbed higher, stretching toward a place that only the brave or the broken ever reached. The judges watched with wide, glassy eyes, aware that they were witnessing something far beyond a performance. Then came the note. The note he had practiced quietly in dim rooms. The note that haunted him in his sleep. The note that once felt impossible. He reached for it with everything he had, every wound, every dream, every moment of his life condensed into one breath. And when it came out, it wasn't just powerful. It was heartbreaking. The arena reacted instantly. A wave of emotion rippled across the audience. A woman in the front row covered her mouth as tears spilled down her cheeks. A man who had come for entertainment found himself clutching his chest, overwhelmed. Even the judges, known for their sharp critiques and guarded expressions, felt their composure shatter. Their eyes softened, their faces broke open, and tears began to form. The note wasn't perfect. It was better, it was honest. It cracked slightly at the end, revealing the human behind the voice. And that tiny imperfection made it real, made it raw, made it unforgettable. When the note faded, the silence that followed was heavy and sacred. No one dared to move. no one dared to breathe. For a few seconds, the entire world stood still, held captive by the sound of one young man's truth. Eli had not just sung a note. He had struck the deepest part of every heart in the room. The silence hung in the arena like a fragile crystal, shimmering with awe and disbelief. Every eye was fixed on Eli, the quiet Filipino man who had transformed a simple stage into a sanctuary of emotion. The applause did not come immediately. It lingered in suspense, stretching seconds into an eternity. People were not clapping, they were catching their breath, trying to understand the depth of what they had just witnessed. Then, slowly, the first hand rose. A judge, eyes still glistening with tears, leaned forward, letting their disbelief give way to unrestrained admiration. The sound of clapping started softly, like raindrops falling on still water. It grew steadily, unstoppable, as the audience rose to their feet one by one. By the time the last note had faded into memory, the arena roared with the kind of applause that shakes the soul. Eli stood frozen, overwhelmed, the weight of every struggle and every sacrifice pressing on him. His guitar rested against his chest, silent now, as he let the reality of the moment sink in. Faces around him, strangers moments ago, shined with admiration, tears, and gratitude. The judges, usually so poised, wiped their cheeks, unable to hide the storm of emotion that Eli had awakened in them. For Eli, the moment was both terrifying and liberating. Every lonely night, every moment of doubt, every song sung to empty walls had led to this exact instant. And now, he was not just performing. He was connecting, reaching hearts across oceans and cultures, showing the world that vulnerability could be strength, that courage could change lives, and that a single voice, born from the depths of hope and pain, could resonate with millions. He finally exhaled, a trembling smile breaking across his face. For a fleeting heartbeat, the stage was still, filled only with the memory of his song. Then the applause returned, louder, more thunderous than before, carrying him forward into the realm of dreams realized. Cameras flashed, capturing a young man transformed, not by fame, but by the courage to be completely, unashamedly himself. In that moment, the arena understood the truth that Eli had always known: the world listens most closely when we sing with honesty, when we dare to be vulnerable, and when we let our hearts speak before our words. And as he left the stage, one thought remained, shining brighter than any spotlight: sometimes, a single voice is all it takes to change everything.